A heavy storm raged across the hills, howling winds and bitter rain pounding against the windows of Charlotte Montgomery's grand estate. She stood by the fire, staring into its crackling flames, wondering if she'd ever feel truly warm again. Her world had become a place of solitude ever since the death of her husband, and she had convinced herself that she was better off that way. But little did she know, fate had a different plan, and it began with a knock at her door. If you believe that sometimes life surprises us when we least expect it, don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this story unfolds. The doorbell rang, its shrill sound slicing through the silence of the great hall. Charlotte's heart jumped. Who could be visiting at this hour, especially in such a storm? She hesitated, her mind instinctively rejecting the notion of dealing with unwanted guests. But something inside her stirred, urging her to answer. As she opened the door, the wind rushed in, and there, drenched and leaning heavily against the frame, stood a man, a cowboy, his clothes soaked through, his face grim with the strain of exhaustion. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers with a kind of quiet urgency, as though he had been searching for her and had found the door to her world. "Man," he rasped, his voice low, rough from the cold. "I need shelter. I've no place else to go." His words, simple as they were, hit Charlotte in a way she couldn't explain. She could see in his stance, the way he leaned against the door, that he wasn't just asking for shelter from the storm. He was asking for something deeper, something unspoken. Despite her better judgment, Charlotte stepped aside, her hand moving to close the door behind him. It was not the first time someone had shown up on her doorstep in need of refuge, but something about this man, the way he seemed to carry a weight in his presence, was different. She helped him inside, where the warmth of the fire seemed to embrace him, though not enough to loosen the tension in his jaw. Charlotte's life had been meticulously planned for the past 3 years. Widowhood had forced her into a solitary existence, one she had grown accustomed to, despite the pain that still lingered beneath the surface. She had sworn off love, making peace with her status as a wealthy, independent woman. But as she looked at the stranger, his broad frame and weathered features somehow out of place in her carefully curated world, she couldn't help but feel the stirrings of an unfamiliar emotion, something she'd buried long ago. As the cowboy removed his hat and slowly looked around her home, Charlotte found herself drawn to his presence. There was no pretense about him, no forced charm or polite niceties. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of their mutual loneliness. His eyes met hers again, and in that brief, fleeting moment, Charlotte felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. "So, what brings you here, mister?" she began, trailing off as she realized she hadn't even asked his name. "Cool," he answered, his voice steady. "Jack Cool. I've been traveling for days, ma'am. I was hoping to find some rest from this storm." Charlotte nodded, offering him a seat by the fire. As she did, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that this was no random encounter. Something about the way Jack Cool had appeared at her door, so unexpectedly and at such a time, made her wonder if it was more than just a simple twist of fate. Her thoughts were interrupted when Jack's hand gripped the arm of the chair, his face turning slightly pale as he shifted in discomfort. She was subtly aware of how much danger he must have been in, out there on the stormy roads, alone. There was more to his arrival than mere coincidence. But she wouldn't find out the truth just yet, if at all. The storm raged outside, but the storm brewing inside Charlotte's chest was one that could no longer be ignored. As Jack sank into the chair, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight, Charlotte couldn't help but wonder if this man's presence in her life was the beginning of something she could never have imagined. Would she ever allow herself to trust again? Or was this just a fleeting moment in time that would pass as quickly as the storm outside? But as the storm continued to batter the estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life, her carefully crafted life, was about to change forever. The next few days passed in a strange quiet, with Charlotte growing increasingly aware of Jack's presence in her home. What had started as an act of charity was turning into something far more complex, something that pulled at the carefully constructed barriers she had spent years building around her heart. Jack was no longer just the stranger who had sought shelter from the storm. He had become a fixture in her life, moving through her estate with an ease that made her wonder how someone so raw, so different from the men she'd known, could fit so seamlessly into her world. Jack kept to himself, offering little about his past. But there was something about the way he moved, his rugged grace, the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him, that made Charlotte feel both uneasy and strangely comforted. He'd never spoken of his family or where he came from, and Charlotte found herself oddly content with the silence. There was no need to ask questions. Not yet, anyway. One afternoon, after several days of the storm subsiding, Jack had ventured out into the garden, where Charlotte found him kneeling beside the rows of wildflowers her husband had once tended. He was digging with a purpose, as though trying to reclaim something, perhaps from his past, or perhaps from the vast emptiness he had walked away from. "Jack, do you miss the open range?" she asked, her voice tentative. She had often wondered what had brought him here, why a man like him, strong, independent, would seek out a wealthy widow in the middle of nowhere. He paused, looked up at her with those dark, intense eyes that had once held nothing but exhaustion, but now held something else, something closer to understanding. "I miss the quiet," he said simply, wiping his hands on his pants. "But I didn't come here for peace." His voice was firm, as though he had finally come to terms with his own truth. "I came because something in me, something I've been running from, caught up with me. And now I can't turn back." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. There was something heavy in his words, something that hinted at a past far darker than she had ever imagined. But as much as she wanted to press him for details, she knew Jack wouldn't open up unless he was ready. "Is it something you can outrun?" she asked, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. Jack stood, dusting off his hands, his gaze never leaving hers. "No," he said quietly. "Some things you can't outrun. They find you, no matter how fast or far you run." The air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. For the first time, Charlotte felt a strange sense of connection with him, something she couldn't quite explain. She had spent years avoiding connections, hiding from the world, but Jack's words resonated with her in a way she couldn't deny. "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable," Jack said, his tone softening. But sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. Charlotte wasn't sure how to respond. She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to stand alone. But Jack's presence was beginning to chip away at that certainty. His quiet strength, his mystery, had a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. The days grew colder, and Jack continued to stay at the estate, helping around the property when needed. The more Charlotte observed him, the more she saw the man beneath the rough exterior, the kindness he displayed in his small acts of generosity, the way he treated her with respect, not pity. He had a way of seeing her, not just the wealthy widow, but the woman behind the title. But with every passing day, Charlotte knew that their time together was running out. He would leave, she was certain of it. His secrets were too heavy, and she could feel the weight of them pressing on him. The cowboy had come to her life for a reason, but that reason had yet to reveal itself. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in the drawing room, Jack's phone rang. It was the first time she had heard it in all the days he had been staying with her. His hand faltered as he reached for it, and Charlotte couldn't help but notice the way his face hardened. He answered it with a curt, "What is it?" And then, after a brief pause, "I'll be there. Don't do anything stupid." Charlotte's curiosity was piqued, but she said nothing as Jack hung up and turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I have to go," he said, his voice low. "There's something I need to handle. It won't take long." She nodded, though the unease was growing inside her. She had been living in a world of self-imposed isolation for so long, and Jack had come along to show her a glimpse of something different, something real. She wanted to ask him where he was going, what he was doing, but the truth was, she feared the answers. "Be careful," she said instead, her voice a soft whisper. Jack looked at her, his gaze softening for the first time. "I will," he said, and with that, he turned and left the house, leaving Charlotte alone with her thoughts. She stood by the window, staring out into the night, the storm now long gone, but the mystery of Jack still lingering in the air. The next morning, the sound of hooves echoed through the estate as Jack returned, but this time, there was something different about him. His demeanor had changed, hardened, as if the weight of whatever he had faced had become too much to carry. Charlotte met him at the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't need to ask. She could see the tension in his eyes, the lines on his face that hadn't been there before. "Jack, what happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze flicked to hers, then away. I told you, some things you can't outrun, he replied quietly. And some things you can't protect people from. The unease that had settled in Charlotte's chest deepened. She had known from the start that Jack wasn't just a cowboy. But the secrets he carried were starting to weigh too heavily on both of them. And now, Charlotte had to decide if she would step into that storm with him, or let it tear them both apart. The days that followed were filled with an almost tangible tension. Charlotte couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the air whenever Jack was near. He had become more distant, his thoughts seemingly consumed by something he refused to speak of, and Charlotte's once serene estate now felt like a battleground of emotions. She could no longer ignore the pull between them, the undeniable connection that had sparked from the moment he stepped into her home. One evening, as Charlotte sat in the library, Jack came to her. This time, there was no avoiding the storm between them. He stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. I can't stay here anymore, Charlotte, he said, his voice steady but heavy. I've already risked too much. I don't want to drag you into my mess. Charlotte stood, her heart racing. Then let me help you. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Jack hesitated, the weight of his secrets almost suffocating him. You don't know what you're asking. There's danger, and it's not just me. It's you, too. But Charlotte was unwavering. I'm already in this with you. I won't walk away. Not now. His gaze softened, and for the first time in days, Jack let his guard down. I never wanted you to be part of this. But now, I can't imagine leaving without you. As he took a step toward her, Charlotte reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing in a quiet promise. She didn't know what lay ahead, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. Jack had become her storm to weather, and she would stand by him, no matter the cost.